Our conversation today is with Dr. Mitu Staroni. She's a neuroscience researcher and author, and her new book is entitled Hyper Efficient. And we're going to talk about optimizing our brains. This is about as practical as you can imagine from somebody who understands how our brain works and how it can change the way we work, which changes our life. This is going to be so good. Here we go. Okay, Mitu, I'm excited to ask you about the gears of the brain. When I was reviewing and reading the book, I laughed out loud when I first saw it because I thought this makes sense to me because I am a diagnosed high-performing ADHD person, so I'm able to function. Just have a lot of irritating habits for my poor wife and can't ever remember where my keys are and things of that nature, but I've learned how to channel it. And so you talk a good bit about that in the book as well. But when I saw the gears of the brain, I thought this is really fascinating and I think simplifying for a lot of people who want to win at work. And that's our whole goal here. So I want you to lay out these three gears for us and just unpack those for a moment. Then we'll dive into, some of the specifics, but lay those out for us.
So it's a gear metaphor. So if you imagine your brain working like an engine and the engine is working at 3 speeds. So 3 speeds of power. So slow, medium, and fast. When it's slow, you feel, so if you want to know what it feels like when it's slow, I call that gear 1. And that's how you would feel when you are bored, slightly daydreamy, you can't really concentrate. Every time you try to focus, your mind is drifting away onto just other thoughts, not being distracted as such, but you just can't focus. It's just not attractive enough for you to focus. It's just whatever you're looking at is just does not have that holding power. That's being in gear 1. In gear 2, you are able to focus. You've found something that really grabs at your attention. Or on the flip side, you've produced that brain state where you're able to pay attention to whatever you're doing. And gear 3 is when your brain's engine is moving at an even higher power. It's processing information more powerfully, faster. But when it becomes faster, its accuracy goes down. You're reacting quickly. You are just responding. So you're typing really quickly, but you're not really reading what you're typing. You're not really analyzing what you're typing. Things that come at you, whether they're phone messages, whether they're noises just around you, people calling, things beeping, they just grab at your attention. You just cannot control where your attention goes. That's gear 3. And if you imagine a typical day at work or, when you wake up in the morning, you sit down to do something, chances are you're going to be in one of these 3 states. And the reason why I find it quite a helpful concept is if you can figure out what keeps you in gear 2, that's the middle zone, the Goldilocks zone, where your attention is very easy to control. If you can figure that out, then you will be able to curate anything you're doing to get the maximum output possible from you.
And you believe that we can figure that out, yes?
I do. I believe we can figure it out to a great extent. Really not just by doing stuff, but more by not doing several things that we tend to do.
Yeah. Now that's fascinating. And so before we get into that part, are there times in the workday or are there types of work that gear 1 serve a little bit better than maybe gear 2 or gear 3? The question becomes then, if that's true, how do we identify that? So first, is that true where certain gears of our brain kind of work better for certain types of work?
So when you look at work as a whole, if you think back to the time of the assembly lines when you just had to keep working, you had to keep working fast. In fact, the faster you worked, the more money you made, the more income you brought to your company, whatever it was you're producing. At that point, really just carrying on working without stopping, without thinking, moving as fast as possible was actually advantageous. not for your health, but for
right.
your particular circumstances at that point, for production, for productivity as it was measured back then. And so that would have inspired, and that did inspire the huge burst of coffee consumption, the whole trend of, carrying on working as fast as you can, the long hours. That is really a very much a gear three state. You could argue that that kind of work would have been served well by being in that gear. Another kind of work where it helps to be in gear three is if you're really quickly responding without thinking. So if you are if you're working in an emergency service, if you're dealing with a crisis, then when your brain flips to gear three, it actually really helps you, because if you think and wait as if you're planning your next move like a chess move, you're not going to get that job done. You will waste time. So there, gear three is good. But for everything else, you want to be in gear two.
Okay, good. So how do we then figure out our gear personality? You write about this extensively, and I think this has got to be the awareness piece that allows us to then be able to shift, if you will, using the gear metaphor. So how do we figure out our I don't know if it's our innate wiring. Is that a thing? Is like we come into the world where some of us are maybe kind of predominantly gear one brains? Is that a case?
So the way to think about it is not necessarily which gear you're in, but how easily you can get into gear two.
Okay.
So for some of us, if you imagine the gear as a proper gearbox, which you have to kind of shift to move, for a portion of us, that gear is quite stiff. So you need things to be really stimulating. You need your kind of overall average level of challenge, uncertainty, stimulation, information transfer to need you to really push up the gear. Because if you think about it, the three powers of the engine, these three gears, what are they doing? They're making your brain process information faster and more powerfully. So your brain will only ratchet up to gear two if it deems whatever you're doing worth doing. So it has to seem interesting. But there comes the difference. What is interesting to some, what is stimulating to some, is extremely stimulating to other people. So for some people, the smallest level of uncertainty or the smallest amount of competition or anxiety or just general uncertainty is going to shift you slightly from gear one up to gear two. But for other people, the slightest uncertainty can shift you all the way from gear one to gear three. So you become overwired, over vigilant. So different people will respond to situations in different ways. So you could ask yourself, okay, what kind of job, what kind of environment am I really comfortable with? Am I comfortable with uncertainty? Do I find myself staying really calm when people around me are just shaking? Or can I, walk into another office, walk into, some workplace, do something that really bores me, that my attention just drifts and I start falling asleep, but it seems to hold everyone else's concentration really well. I need a different kind of place to work. I need a different kind of environment to really, really capture my attention and thrive.
Yeah. Well, I use a methodology here in all my work. We have an assessment that measures work you're good at, work you enjoy, and work that creates results that matter to you. And after coaching 10,000 people live on the air, I've figured that is the three pieces that we need to really thrive in work. We got to be good at it. We've got to enjoy the task or the role, and it's got to create a result that matters. So this is really fun to hear this, because I would simply say that if we've achieved that, then it would feel as though we're going to be able to be in gear two most of the time. Is that true or false? You can correct me. I don't mind.
No, that is absolutely true. And there's another really, really interesting reason why. So if you think about, we use the word motivation quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There are two ways. If you imagine your brain like a truck, you're either pushing the pedal from the inside or you're towing the truck from the outside. Right. So in most jobs, we unfortunately end up having our trucks towed from the outside. So we do it because we have to often. We do it for the financial incentive, and we kind of tick boxes. We do things we're supposed to do. Now, in this climate where work is changing, life is changing, AI is changing, lots of things, it's much more effective to, instead of getting your tuck towed from the outside, to push the pedal from the inside. So your brain has to want to do it. And there's some really exciting research that's come out pretty recently about what is there in work that can make you feel like this, that can really make you push your pedal from the inside. And there's a concept called the learning progress mechanism, which links into all the three things that you've just mentioned. The mechanism is basically as follows. We're always looking for ways to improve, whether we are aware of it or not. And so in any situation, in any circumstance, we're trying to reduce uncertainty by grinding information, by processing information. And what the brain does is, in any situation, it looks at any opportunity, any avenue around you where it can process information and achieve and master something as quickly as possible. As soon as it finds itself doing it, it starts feeling really good for your brain, and it starts creating this kind of intrinsic pleasure, intrinsic motivation. Now, the areas where you'd find you're likely to achieve maximum improvement, maximum progress, it can be a skill, it can be knowledge, it can be anything. But the areas where you're most likely to find it are ones that kind of come naturally to you, because you're most likely to make progress if you have a little bit of baseline there already. Another area where you're most likely to make progress is if you can see the goal, and you can really see yourself, you can measure yourself coming towards that goal. And that's where the purpose aspect comes in. So all the three things actually link into this. So if you can find the recipe to put yourself in a situation where you make rapid improvement, rapid mastery with a skill, with some information, with whatever project or task you're doing, and link those three things together, that in itself puts you in gear 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And now the brain is performing at its highest. That's what the research shows. That's what you've learned. That's at that gear 2. That's where we're at our greatest functioning, power, which means efficiency. And that's the whole thing, hyper efficiency. But what's interesting about what you're doing, and I think this is true. Correct me if I'm wording this wrong. While you're writing about hyper efficiency, you're not writing about being busier and being, more overload. It's just allowing the brain to actually work as the supercomputer that it is. And yet here we are in a day and age where burnout data is off the charts, stress at work off the charts. How much of this work that you are engaged in would help solve those issues?
So the way to think about it is, your brain is not like muscle, because it rests while it works and it works while it rests. It also works in undulations. So you will know that when you're sitting there, you're really trying to come up with an idea, or you're trying to solve something, you're going to have a burst of progress. And then suddenly, without doing anything voluntarily on your part, your attention just drifts off. And you really can't get that inspiration, that burst you had just moments ago. And looking at the bigger picture, your brain's performance, when you're thinking about mental performance, mental work, or just general knowledge work, you will work, because of the nature of your brain, in waves. Okay, you will have peaks, and then you'll have lows. Those lows are necessary because they give the brain a little bit of rest, and also the brain is constantly varying. Now, if you work continuously, like the assembly lines of the past, with the psychology of just producing quantity, so you're just producing stuff, you're not really thinking much about quality. The quality is standardized, which means it can't be worse, but it really can't be better either. You're just working as a flat line. That is the old measure of efficiency. So the reason why I'm calling this hyper efficiency is because when you are dealing with the brain, as human beings, the edge we have over machines is that we have these extraordinary peaks of creativity, of insights, of solving things, of looking at things that machines can't look at. And in order to get there, we have to allow the brain to work in its undulations, in its peaks of brilliance and its kind of dips of rest and slowness. If you do that, if you recognize that, then you're not just producing more, what you're producing is of much higher quality. And if you focus on quality, not quantity,
Yeah.
that I would argue should be the new measure of efficiency
I
in
absolutely
this
agree.
digital age.
I absolutely agree. Are there times of day? What do we know in a 24-hour cycle? What do we know? Is it again a general application, or is it very specific to the person about times of day, maybe where certain types of work, creative work, like I'm in a creative space, and so I'm creating content all the time. At least I've, pretty high rhythm of that. Are there times of the day that are better for that plotting, kind of administrative, I got to check the box work versus the creative work? What do we know?
Yes. So there are times of day when you are most likely or you're more likely to come up with creative ideas, insights, kind of thinking outside the box. And those times of day for these creative periods are first thing in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
last thing in the day. So just before you sleep. So these are
Interesting.
you can say you peak off peak. So you peak before you usually would go to work,
Uh-huh.
and you also peak after you return from work. And if you look at the whole sort of pattern of the day, so this creative window happens pretty early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then from around 10 o'clock to around midday, that's better for focused work, for
Okay.
focused concentration, focusing attention. After lunchtime, there's a dip in attention. We call it a post-lunch dip, but it happens even if you don't have lunch. So that's a great time to schedule any recurring meetings or do all the boring emails that you've been putting
Uh-huh.
off, where you don't need to think so much. And then from the mid to late afternoon to sort of mid-evening comes the next window for focusing. And that is again followed by this short window of creativity before you go to bed.
How short is that window in the evening for creativity?
So So that would depend on how tired you are. So if you, for instance, have had a nap at lunchtime or a short nap immediately after lunch, then that window would be a couple of hours, an hour to a couple of hours. But if you're very tired and you've, for instance, taken caffeine or you've pushed yourself through a really hard day,
Mm-hmm.
then it might be much shorter because you might either be still feeling quite wired from the rest of your day when you've just pushed on, or because you're very tired, you will be sliding into sleep.
So ballpark, you're talking about 1 to 2 hours, 1 to 3.
Correct.
Okay. And then,
1 to 2 hours.
okay,
Yeah.
1 to 2. And then how late are we talking about? How late is too late? I'm actually going to school on this one because it's funny that you say this because I've written 4 books and I unwittingly do my best writing at night, not late, but at night, back patio. And I don't know if the cigar has anything to do with it or not. Maybe it's the nicotine that calms my brain. I don't know. But it's interesting. Is it 7 to 10, 7 to 9 ballpark roughly? Just curious.
So a ballpark would be dusk, from dusk till night. So around
Ah,
about dusk. So around about sunset. So again, this
wow.
is a really loose ballpark, but I'd
Yeah.
say around, depending on where in the world you live, I'd say around maybe 7:30, all the way to 9:30, 10 o'clock. And the morning starts in the same way. So as soon as you wake up from
Mhm.
that point onwards to when, it's brighter, the sun is slightly higher, so maybe 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. With the slight caveat that some of us are morning people, some of us are night people. So about
Yeah.
25% of the population have a day shifted towards the morning
Right.
or night. And in that case, you just shift the whole pattern
Yeah.
towards whichever end you lean
Okay.
towards.
This is fascinating stuff, and it explains a lot about our American work hours. I have to ask you this: have you formulated an opinion, or is there some hard data that you would resource right now as it relates to the changing world of work? We're seeing a massive study in Britain, a 6-month study that yielded some pretty conclusive results on the 4-day work week. We're now seeing this also now being tested in Germany. I actually interviewed a business owner who did it here in the United States. It was not a massive study. She just kind of did it, and she got some publicity around it. Around the 4-day work week and then just the 8-hour workday. With this information, it just feels like we should be rewiring the way we do work or allow people to do work, give them some autonomy to perform in these zones.
I think the last point you made is the most important. I think what all of this shows is that the old measure of working in a very solid, restricted way should be revised
Yeah.
at this moment. And rather than look at it in terms of 4-day work weeks or, put a boundary like that, I would much rather look at it in the following way. Look at it, give people the independence that should they want to work, they should be able to work.
Yeah.
But when you're working, optimize when you're working,
Yeah.
the times of the day you're doing particular types of work, and optimize giving yourself those breaks and working in the right kind of pattern that keeps you really producing your best while you are working. So for instance, you could be a writer and you could spend 8 hours sitting in front of a computer. So you've clocked in 8 hours. But in those 8 hours, you've just come up with 3 good lines.
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas instead of doing that, if you write at the correct times of the day and you give yourself breaks, and you maybe, when you have a mental block, you switch to something else, you do something else, you could write those 3 lines in 10 minutes. And in those 8 hours altogether, you could write an entire article. So I would argue, rather than look at it in terms of hours and in terms of these kind of fixed boundaries, look at the nature of what you're doing and try to tailor the work you're doing to suit your own inherent patterns. And most importantly, don't look at it in terms of X number of hours. Look at it in terms of how much quality work did I get done? How many really actionable ideas did I produce? How many good brainstorming ideas did we produce in this meeting? How many meetings did it take us to come up with this one idea? Would we have come up with this one idea better if we'd held our meetings at different times, or perhaps less frequently, or given team members the opportunity to go and think? So it's all about, let's measure work in terms of quality, in terms of actionable output, sellable product, rather than hours sitting looking busy.
Well, this brings up meetings, which I abhor meetings. I just do. I don't like meetings. I like quick little conversations. The team knows this. They're all shaking their head. I hate meetings. I like conversations. I think it's a very different thing. So I think I know the answer to this, but where in the day should we be having our meetings? If we're aware of our brains, the way you just laid them out in general terms, when are we having our meetings? When's the best time to have those?
So for recurrent meetings, that with respect to everyone in your team,
they got it. They got to have them.
That are routine,
Yeah.
and they, where things get discussed that may not apply to everyone, I would tend to schedule those immediately after lunch, when there's a natural dip in attention. You don't have to be really, really focused. Whereas, if it's a brainstorming meeting, if you're thinking of the next topic for your show,
it's got to be early morning, right?
Right, exactly. So catch people at the right time and do one kind of thing. So if you're brainstorming, just brainstorm. Make it short, make it creative, protect that time from anything else. Whereas if it's just routine discussions, make it after lunch, keep it at that time.
Yeah.
Hey folks, the impact of technology is clearly everywhere we look. In artificial intelligence, social media, the internet, we're seeing technology has the power to divide us, but it also has the power to bring us together. Bethel College School of Technology is helping prepare the next generation of skilled tech workers to be high performers with even higher levels of character. And that's why I'm very proud to announce Bethel College is offering one full scholarship for a program starting this January. Plus, you need to know this, my listeners and viewers who complete their application will get a 10% discount on their tuition. They have micro-credentials, certificates, and degrees in high-demand tech fields like web development, data science, and more. And you could be earning an average starting salary of $75,000 or more in as little as 15 weeks. Now is the perfect time to pursue a career in tech. So don't wait. Get started today. Scholarship applications are due December 15th, 2024. All you got to do is go to bethelcollege.edu/Ken for full details and to receive that 10% tuition discount. That's bethelcollege.edu/Ken. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay, you're a proponent of play at the office. And I love this. I think this makes a lot of leaders' heads spin off their shoulders because they don't just understand it. And I really want to dive into this from the brain hack side of things, if I could use that phrase with a neuroscientist like you. I don't know if that's disrespectful, but that's what everybody thinks of in terms the play. What should that look like? And also, I'll let you have some time on this. Is it an individual application and a group application, this idea of play at work?
So I would say the idea of play is a way of looking at work. If we just go back to the very basic essence of play, when you're playing, the most important thing is you're not terrified of the consequences of what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're also not doing it with a guaranteed result. So you play, you lose, you explore, you do this. It's a self-generated exploration. And that self-generated exploration gives you pleasure. And that principle is really, really important as we're shifting workspaces into, workplaces that are influenced by AI, by automation. If you imagine the hierarchy of an organization from the past, or even until recently, you would have the senior executive at the top making decisions. You would have the rest of the hierarchical pyramid, so especially the bottom layers, gathering the data, processing it, presenting it. Now, machines can do all of that. So even if you're the most junior person in your company, you are likely to have to make decisions, to explore, to think creatively. So having a general attitude of letting people enter this frame of mind is really important. Now, of course, when you're running a business, when you're in a business, you can't have everyone playing all the time.
Right.
But it's good to devote a particular portion of your day, portion of your time, portion of your energy, if you like, to, as an organization, as a team, to maybe tackling the next problem as a form of play.
Yeah.
So don't think about the consequences. Don't just think about the bottom line. Go with what ifs and create that sort of very, very exploratory attitude where you're not going to be criticized if your idea is silly, if it doesn't work, or if you're just going off on a tangent. So it's more the attitude that's really, really important.
Sure.
And if you can bring that into an organization, we now have so many tools at work for us. The employee of the future isn't going to be a worker, it's going to be an AI manager. So if you're going to be an AI manager, you're becoming a craftsman with these amazing tools. So you have to learn how to create, you have to learn how to play, and nurturing that will bring benefits to an organization.
I want to stay on this for just one more second because I think that there are limits to this, but I think allowing people some sort of freedom to play something, and I literally mean at this point we're going to take a break from work. And I remember years ago when I was running an agency and we were booking speakers. This is many, many years ago. And I bought a foosball table for our office because we loved foosball. And we're on the phone talking all day. I mean, high intensity. And we would have multiple breaks during the day that we would literally put it on the clock. We go, all right, we're going to play for 15 minutes. And we would honor it. We'd stop and we'd get back to work. And we were energized by that. And so as we're talking about the brain and hyper efficiency and those gears, I do want to ask you, scheduled play or scheduled break, if you want to read a book under a tree, whatever. I'm just curious how much that helps us in those gears, maybe navigate back into gear 2. Does play have a role in that?
Enormously. I think that's a great idea. What you just described is the best, one of the best ways you could actually have a break, because you are including physical movement, you're including you're adopting a mental attitude of play. So every time you have a break, you're going from being defensive to being, cooperative. So I think that's a great idea, and more places should adopt that. But getting into this play mode switches you back into the optimal brain state for doing this kind of work, for sure.
I want to ask you mentioned AI, so I know you have some thoughts on this and everybody's thinking about it. So obviously AI is going to make us more efficient. There's no question. But I guess with that efficiency comes potentially a lot of pressure to get more and more and more done. And you espouse in this book, we need to change our pace, patterns rather than thinking about pace and speed all the time. It's about patterns.
Right. So right now, we're at a really interesting point in the way we work, in that the productivity of an organization doesn't come down to the productivity of an individual human anymore. So human, when we measure it in terms of quantity, because a human's capacity for producing quantity of work, so doing masses of work, and the speed at which a human works is already massively overtaken by machines, by AI. And this is going to get worse. So we should no longer look towards working in a way that makes us do more. We have to now just concede that space to machines. And instead, we have to now use these machines as tools, as our own personal assistants, to do what the human brain is really, our prefrontal cortex, the bit of the brain at the front of our heads, is what makes us human. And that bit of the brain is wasted on doing routine, repetitive work at massive quantities. So what we instead should be doing is appreciating that we have this huge repertoire of tools for our own personal use, and this will be getting bigger. So instead, we have to now think, how can we creatively use these tools? How can we make, what would the next product be? We can now assimilate the best information, the best data, or data analytics from how customers would potentially use this product. What is lacking? What is empty on the shelf? How can we use this information and really come up with something that is mind-blowingly creative? That is where we have to place our focus. And I'll give you a little example. So for the first time in history, a London school has started its high school curriculum teaching entirely with AI. And the teachers are now coaches. So the students are taught entirely by AI. Now, if you think of the extraordinary implication of that, so it's an experiment. It's just started in September. So we don't know how it'll pan out.
And let me jump in to get a picture of this. This is great. So are we talking like kids are sitting in a traditional classroom setting, and they're essentially being taught by some type of avatar?
No. So yes and no. So every student is sitting in a classroom setting with their own personal computer.
Okay.
Right.
So
they
AI
have
is teaching them
peers.
through their. Okay, got you. All right.
Right. And for every student, the curriculum is perfectly tailored to what they're good at, their own talents, what they're weak at, and their rate of progress.
That's amazing. Can we I don't want to skip past that. I mean, because no, this is the whole problem I have with the American education system. Is that, you take a kid like me, I'll pick on me, very gifted in in English and grammar, if you will, and in history. And so everything was verbal, right? You get me into math and science, and I'm telling you, Doc, you should check my brain. It's dark. There's nothing happening on the math and science side. I just don't have it. And it's okay. I'm okay with it. But so now the AI would allow for teaching that subject in a way for somebody like me that would be struggling. It'd be very, very different experience for me on my computer versus the kid like my younger brother who is very gifted in math and science. Is that what I'm understanding?
Exactly. So ultimately, there's no judgment between someone's ability. Someone might be stronger in math, someone might be stronger in English. There's no judgment. There's no comparison. There's no peer-to-peer comparison. You're still sitting with your peers. But your personal individualized AI program is tailoring your curriculum, your syllabus to your personal ability. So that, if you are weaker in one area and your personal AI will make sure you get taught extra well in that area, and you don't have to suffer the embarrassment of being compared, of holding the class back. None of these things.
Fascinating. And then how does the teachers, I understand the coaching concept, are they just kind of there for that extra guidance and encouragement?
So from what I understand, they are there as coaches. So there will
Wow.
be some issues which the computer program will not be able to deal
Sure.
with. Students might have questions that lie outside of that box.
Hmm.
But and this is an extraordinary situation because this can potentially turn the entire world of teaching, not just in Britain, but across the world,
Sure.
upside down. So what do teachers do in that sense? So coming back to your point about how we should tailor our lives now, how we should plan the future with AI. So for instance, with these teachers, now they have the opportunity to provide what machines cannot provide. So to be really creative,
That's exactly
to
right.
to teach extremely difficult concepts,
Hmm.
to make sure that the students, if they have any questions that lie outside the boundary, how can you really explain it to them? What are the interesting ways in which you can really tailor, some kind of complicated concept, tailor their understanding to it. So they're there to really add the icing on the cake. And so there, obviously, we're talking about quality.
Mm.
We're not talking about getting hundreds and hundreds of students through their exams. We're talking about providing really high quality input to the students who are going through their exams.
Yeah.
So that's a nuance
Yeah.
that this world is going to reveal.
And I got to believe that there's a parallel here to this test in the school environment to management and leadership in the work environment, as becoming more adept with the human skills and letting AI create a little bit more of the machine efficiency. There's got to be some parallels there. Do you see that?
I absolutely see that. And I think what's really interesting is if you think about how assembly lines changed the way humans worked, it
Hmm.
dehumanized us quite a bit because
Yeah.
it essentially cut our heads off from our bodies. So our heads slept while our bodies worked.
Yeah.
And now with office work generally, our heads work while our bodies sleep.
Yes.
And this is not how we are meant to perform, right? So, what AI is doing now is taking the work that we've been performing at bulk all these years and, the repetitive
Hmm.
going through data, creating reports, even writing email, doing PowerPoint presentations, all of this stuff, which is, it doesn't really require extreme mental effort, as in extreme creativity, sort of the higher cognitive skills. It does require effort, but at a very low level of challenge. So all of this can now be done by machines. So humans can now really work in their peaks of brilliance where needed, not with a focus on just generating lots of output, but really kind of honing that and using what is uniquely human: emotional intelligence, uh, creativity, analytical skills, the ability to critically, analyze things. All of those skills are going to become extremely important.
Yeah. Which says to me we shouldn't be afraid of AI. We should be embracing it, certainly in the workplace.
I agree. I mean, of course, right now, during the transition, many people will be affected,
No question.
and
Yeah.
they already are. But I think that if we can, once we pass that, I really think that it gives humans the chance to do what they're really good at even better, without using or wasting human skills. I mean, if you think about it, knowledge work from, after the Second World War, sitting and typing stuff, typing letters, typing reports, that was really making the brain do what the body did on assembly lines. And that's not fair for the brain. We were thinking of the brain, of the mind, as a kind of machine
Yeah.
that's running an assembly line of products, which then turn into a letter, turn into an email. And that's really, not only is it disrespectful to our extraordinary talent as human beings, but it's also really wasteful of what we can do. So AI gives us the opportunity to be able to do that. Of course, bearing in mind there will be a problem during the transition.
I want to ask you about some specific challenges in the workplace and your knowledge of the brain and what we can do to optimize our brain to help deal with just some things that we cannot control. And I'm thinking of some of the biggest stressors and things I hear about from people. Urgency, deadlines. We live in a world now where COVID changed the way that our work rhythm is happening in the office, things that are mandated to us. So I want you to talk to somebody who's listening to this and they're going, I love the gears. I get that. I want to get in gear too. But I'm in a situation right now because of all the urgency and deadlines of their particular situation. It feels as if it's just constantly coming in on them, and they feel as though they have little control over where it's coming from. They've just got to deal with it. Knowing what you know about the brain, what are some practical things that we can do to help ourselves in that situation?
So if you imagine the world around you like a pipe, and you have, or a tunnel, and you have traffic coming towards you. Mm-hmm. When it comes to things like urgency, what is happening is your brain is processing information, it's crunching numbers. And if there's a deadline, if there's some kind of a punishment or something you fear, your brain thinks, okay, I have to work even harder, even faster. So it pushes down on the pedal and you shift into gear 3. So what you have to do is you have to trick your brain into creating the perception that actually the traffic is flowing slowly. The tunnel is very narrow. There isn't a lot of traffic. It's okay. So we can do this in several levels. On a superficial level, you can say, okay, so as soon as I have a deadline, I'm going to cross off 3 things, or if you can, 5 things ideally, but at least 3 things from the stuff I was intending to get done. So the old trick of putting urgent, then important.
Right.
So kind of passing out what you're doing, but essentially you have to do a trade-off.
Yeah.
So as soon as you have a deadline, it means your brain is going to push on the pedal because you have more traffic.
Yep.
It perceives more traffic.
Right.
So you have to ease off the pedal. So you say, okay, I'm not going to do these 3 things.
Okay.
That's the first thing. The second thing is that if you are working to a deadline, then do everything in your environment that keeps you calm. So check the kind of environment you're in. Little things that we don't really think twice about, but things like noise levels, the rhythm of activity in your surroundings. Yeah. So if you perceive that people are talking faster, speaking at a higher pitch, if you perceive high-pitched alarms or high-frequency alarms, all of those make your brain think time is moving faster. And if time moves faster, your brain thinks it has to push down on the pedal and accelerate. So you want to create an illusion for your brain, for your mind, that things are very slow. And you do that by creating slow sounds, low frequency sounds of people speaking in low tones, low voices. Rhythms. You can add music.
I was going to ask you about music. I mean, you know this stuff because you're the expert here about how the brain reacts to music. But I know enough to get myself in trouble that if we play calming music or things of that nature, it does in fact help us reset and kind of trick our brain. Is that true?
Yes, there is true. There is good data on that. So if you play slow, soft, and low pitch music, you slow down, you calm down, you get back into gear 2. And, we know this because when you wake up in the morning and you want to get really geared up for work, or you're gearing up for a workout, note I said geared up.
Yes,
so we
that's
come back
right.
To the gear.
That's right.
So when you're doing that, what do? You listen to fast-paced, uplifting music at a really fast pace. You don't listen to a really slow, soothing spa melody.
Right, exactly.
So music is a really powerful booster. Also things like, just the general activity around you. So, you go to a quieter room, you will feel calmer. You go to a room where everything is moving quickly, you will feel more alert and your brain will process information faster. So it's all about creating the illusion of time. You have to make your brain think that time is slowing down.
I want to ask you another, I think it's probably very related. But again, a lot of leaders listening in here, a lot of managers, they've got a lot on them. They got to make a lot of decisions, sometimes with not great information. And you can form some sense of decision fatigue. Like, I just don't want to make any decision. It's just too much. What would you say to that person? How can we rewire the brain in that moment?
So the thing with decision fatigue is the number of decisions you make add up. And if you make a certain number of decisions, you will feel tired. So there are some tricks around it. And it's all about your brain processing information, having to process lots of information. So when you're making a decision about anything, you're a bit like a judge at a court. So you're gathering the evidence, analyzing the evidence, and forming the judgment. So one good way to kind of ease the pressure is by splitting it into two. So you first just gather the evidence, but don't decide. Another way to look at it is to think of it as window shopping before buying. So you're going in just window shopping, but you're not going to put yourself through the pressure of having to decide whether you're actually going to buy something. So split your decision into gathering information and deciding. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is try to keep your decision options as small as possible. So if you have a bunch of 10 things that you're having to decide from, find two extremes and split it in half. And then decide between pairs rather than decide between 10 things the whole time. So keep your options low. And you'll know this if you go and buy a coffee, you will be given a menu of 15 types. And, if you remember back in the day, you were given a much shorter menu.
That's
and I
right.
definitely find that it's, you have to pause and you have to think, oh, should I have that? But that is, also good. I feel like that. So the more options you have, the worse it is. Cut your options. And of course, the third thing is every decision adds up to fatigue you. So take regular breaks.
Mm-hmm. As we're talking, I don't want to be disrespectful with this comment, but it feels as though we, as a large portion of our world, we're just on autopilot. We're just kind of letting the day happen to us. And because our brain is so phenomenal, the brain just kind of autopilots and it does its best to help us. But when I think of all of the stress and I see this elevated anxiety, which it didn't exist when I'm just curious your take on this. This is kind of a statement and I want you to kind of pick it apart. It feels as though we have so many more threats that I just don't think existed in our conscience. Like when I was a kid and a high schooler, I grew up in the 80s, so I understand I'm middle-aged now as much as I don't want to admit it. But then I look at the world of work and just life in general. And after listening to you and reading through the book, it feels as though anxiety and all the stress, which is reported on all the time, I'm getting weary of it, just talking about it. It feels as though a big part of it is because we're all on autopilot and we don't have this understanding of this complex machine called the brain. We don't have to be neuroscientists like you, but we can go, okay, there's a way for us to actually be in far more control if we understand how our brain works. And it feels as though that the problem is we just don't understand how our brain works and we're not even trying to figure it out. Have I oversimplified this?
No, I think I agree with you. I'm going to tell you a little story. So a couple of years ago, I've worked with Dan Buettner, who has done good work on the Blue Zones.
Familiar with his work, yeah.
Yeah, and so I worked with him in Seulo in Sardinia a couple of years ago for a show on Netflix. And what I found there was, the people in blue zones live very long. That's why they're famous. And if you visit these places where people seem to live very long, particularly this unique area, I went there and I really found such a drastic contrast with the way we live.
Yes.
As you say, on autopilot. And I began to wonder whether the problem that the reason why we have so many problems is not so much because of the work we are doing per se, not because of working hard in itself, but of the way we are working. So, take Seulo, this little town in Sardinia. So people there, they herd goats. They are silvopastoralists, and their lives revolve around goat herding. They work incredibly hard. Blue zones are not famous for their wealth. So Sardinia and Solo, people work incredibly hard. They have to wake up very early in the morning at, when dawn breaks, so around 4:30, 5 o'clock. They go up the mountains, even if they're 100 years old. They don't take a single day off. They work for themselves. And it's really backbreaking work. But then they come down from the mountains. They come down after the morning, and then they downshift. And then they discuss what is going on in their lives. They have control. So they have enormous problems. They don't have the certainty that we have, but they have control over the problems that they have. So they know what to control, what not to control, and they navigate their lives. If you imagine the brain as the truck that I described earlier, they're not being towed from the outside.
Right.
They are towing their own truck.
Yes.
So they do have these peaks of incredible hard work. They also have these extremely long, important breaks in that hard work where they switch off. So I think that's one element of it. The way we work is causing it. Autopilot comes into it because we are working according to how we're told to work.
That's right. Yeah.
Kind of the systems that exist, the assembly line-esque systems that exist are making us work in this continual grind. Another aspect of it, I'd say, is just the way communication has improved, the way information has improved. You are getting within the tiny sphere around you, you're getting all the problems, all the information from around the world, even, within your company. At all times, without any barrier. So when you were talking about how when we were children, things were not quite as hectic or as
scary,
anxiety filled, as scary.
Yeah.
So now we have all the world's information, whether it's relevant or not, being beamed into our brains, and we're letting it in every time you look at a screen or whether your phone or computer, you're letting that into your brain. As soon as your brain engages with it, it's having to process it. So the world's information, so all the salient information in the world is being brought to your doorstep. And because information is now a commodity, it has to feel emotionally triggering for you to engage with it. So it's designed to be emotionally triggering.
Yes.
And if you're burdened with this all the time, that's also adding to this sense of uncertainty and
you're
anxiety.
triggered all day long because you have to be triggered to consume. So then we're just triggered.
You're triggered to consume. And also...
Does that mean that our amygdala essentially... You could take a person who's not had a lot of trauma, but does that mean that it's firing all the time on some level?
I would definitely say so. Your emotional circuits are definitely on, they are buzzing at high speeds. And another aspect to it is, this is the information that's coming your way, but generally, if you think about how much information we are having to process with our heads on an average day at work, compared to how much information we had to process with our heads.
Right.
That's really important. 100 years ago, even 150 years ago, it's staggering. And again, what this means is we are naturally, if you put us into the environment we've evolved in, back from when we were hunter-gatherers, and even actually much more recently, we worked as human beings. So we did stuff with our hands, we did stuff with our minds, and in natural organic environments like the mountains of Seulu, for instance, you have lots of the information boundary around you is pretty tight. So you're not getting information unless you're seeking it, right? But right now, so we used to, the person who who set the stone for our information age, Claude Shannon, the work he did really gave the big message that information is the resolution of uncertainty. So we have always hunted for information. But right now, we are being hunted by information. So information is coming at us at all angles, and the brain is having to step on its accelerator to consume it and process it. And that is putting us in this state, because if you think there's information everywhere, You're going to stay on a permanently anxious, wired, vigilant state of mind to be ready and prepared all the time.
It feels as
So
though we know more than we've ever known before, but we're dumber. We're getting dumber quick. Dumber emotionally and dumber from an intelligence standpoint because of the very thing you just described. That's my take, not yours. But I mean, isn't that true? I mean, we are dumbing ourselves because the brain can't even function the way it's supposed to.
So this is a really, really valid point, because when information is coming at you so quickly, your brain is processing everything at the moment it arrives. But it needs to not be in that gear. It needs to be in gear 2 to then join the dots together, to get the bigger picture, to take that bit of information and expand your knowledge tree that's inside your head. And it's not getting a chance to do that. So if you're always processing, if you're always just receiving information, it's just running past you. But like if you're going on a train, this is one way to think of it. If you're traveling on a train or a car, you're looking out of the window, if you're going really, really fast, the scenery just rushes past you. You can't make out any details. So you have to slow down to perceive what's there, to look at the scenery outside your window. And in a way, that's what the brain is doing right now with information. Information is coming at us, but we're not able to assemble it to create this kind of intelligent framework to create meaning for the world around us.
Wow. It's fascinating. My time is limited with you. And I'm just getting warmed up. This is probably a 5-hour discussion that would exhaust your brain. And we don't want to do that to you. We want to honor your time. Midhu, thank you. This was really, really good. We're better for it. And this is the kind of stuff we've got to be using this information and changing our lives just in these practical ways. So really good stuff. Thank you for hanging out with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Big thanks to Dr. Midhu Staroni. Again, the new book is Hyper Efficient. This is all about optimizing your brain. I think it's an absolute must read. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll be back with you again very soon.